Hello and welcome to the Method Matters show. I'm your host, Greg Kouwiloyan, both director and co-founder for Method Recruitment. If you are new to the show, let me briefly explain. What we do on this particular show is we interview inspiring thought leaders across Australia and gain some insights into their past, present and future. And today we have a very, very special guest, one who has been making some wonderful inroads in the senior leadership arena. I would like to welcome Gaby Thomson. Gaby, how are you doing?
I'm great, Greg. I don't know if I live up to that introduction, but I very much appreciate those kind words.
Well, you do in my eyes, all right? So just take the compliment on the chin, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome, listeners. It's wonderful for you to be here. I'm under no illusion how busy you are, so making time for us and our community means the world to me. And for those of you who maybe don't know who Gaby is, let me give you a little bit of extra insight. Gaby Thomson, who has extensive experience and gained extensive experience in the senior leadership space and management roles across the not-for-profit sector, particularly in organisations focused on child welfare and family services. Some of her roles have included leadership positions with Anglicare, the state GM position at AXO, and Chief Operations at White House Victoria, CEO at Domcare, and she's currently the CEO of Yarra Ranges Kinders, where she leads 21 kindergartens across the Yarra Ranges region. Does that just about sum it up?
Greg? 22 kinders now. We've got a new one.
Perfect. And where is the new one?
In Selby.
Oh, wonderful. Is it opened and good to go?
Yes, it is. But actually, they joined us last year, so there's some reforms going on at the moment, and they're wanting to move some of the kinders they want placed. The government would like placed on primary schools, but not run by primary schools. And this one was previously run by a primary school, so we've taken over the management of it. Excellent. It's a beautiful kinder.
Well, I stand corrected, 22, which is great. Ever grown, which is wonderful. Now, without hesitation, I'd love to launch into your journey as an inspirational leader within that not-for-profit arena, and maybe just dig a little bit, or maybe understand a bit more about the path that you. Gaby, let's go back. If you were to reflect on the high school days, did you recall what you wanted to be before becoming the CEO of Yarra Kinders?
I do, and funnily enough, I always wanted to be a social worker. So back in high school, I knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know what it was called. And so I went to a careers day one day. I must have been in about year 9 by then. And I heard about social work and thought, that's the name of what I've been wanting to do, and remained passionate ever since. My dad's a dentist, and he was horrified when I told him. He thought that, I was going to be depressed and end up killing myself or something terrible, where in fact dentists have more struggles than social workers, it appears. But I didn't ever imagine myself being a CEO, I guess. I just I thought about the social work aspect. But, as we talked, went into leadership fairly quickly.
Yeah, wonderful. And what was it? Of course, I'm asking you to cast your mind, but what was it specifically that sort of led you down that pathway? Did you have friends that were in that particular space, or were there any sort of inspirational leaders that you looked up to? What was it about a particular area that you had such a massive, keen interest in back in the day?
I think it was more a personality type. So I had that very sort of, and it remains the case today, I guess. I had that very, and it sounds, well, I guess altruistic. I really, really wanted to help people. I've always been very interested in people's psychology, and probably an over-empathizer, probably to my own detriment at times. So I really, really liked the idea of, I guess, probably more the emotional side. So social work's very practical, and didn't realise it at the time, but you can, and as I have, moved around and do a whole lot of things. So I like change, not knowing that that would be the case. But I think what really drew me to it was the working with people on that very much that emotional level. And like I said, I knew what it was to some extent, but I just didn't know what it was called. But I did really, very much like I'm a very proactive, busy person as well. So the combination of working with people and trying to, I guess, help people find more satisfying lives, and the practical side of it was just the perfect marriage for me.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like, you mentioned the word emotional, do you feel like that you have to have a level of emotional intelligence to sort of navigate that space and deal with the different personality types?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, it's absolutely essential. And I remember going through uni and there was a few people that didn't have that emotional intelligence. And but we had to do 4 practicals back then. So one was like months and months over summer. So I guess those people almost weed themselves out, because if you don't have that emotional intelligence, I think you burn out very quickly, or it's just not a good fit. Yeah.
And that EQ or emotional intelligence piece, it's very hard to measure sometimes. I think some people naturally have that inherent in their sort of DNA and can be quite curious. And other people, when they're sort of faced with challenges or hurdles, sometimes it's difficult to navigate just that. But that's really refreshing to hear. Really refreshing.
And it's something I think I've found that you can't teach. So, along the way as I've gone through management, I've had a couple of, I remember in particular a team leader that I worked with, and she was very driven and incredibly passionate, but she just was missing the emotional nuances of her team. Mm-hmm. And so having to talk to her about that was difficult in itself, and finding the right way to do that was very difficult. And she was very, driven to address it. But I think it's one of those things that if you don't have it, it is very hard to develop.
Yeah. And again, I couldn't agree more. I mean, as a leader of a business of 46 people myself, people have different needs, different nuances, different ways of working, different ways of problem solving. It's difficult to be able to tailor your approach to each individual person, but the people that can adapt to those sort of environments and those sort of behaviours are the ones that typically tend to have the strongest maybe retention in their teams, or have the best outputs, and ideally have a happier team, especially as mental health is on the forefront of every leadership's priority, leadership team's priority, or every leader's priority, I should say. It's difficult, like you said, to train and coach, but when you do find someone who can be inspirational and who can effectively listen and help people through difficult times, that tends to bring a little bit more of a happier sentiment to any team.
Absolutely.
Thanks for that. Now, just reflecting a little bit further, just around maybe the advice component. What would you say were the best words of advice that you've ever heard, or the best advice that you've ever received yourself personally?
I was thinking about this. It is that you can't keep everyone happy all of the time, and that sounds really negative, but it's not. I remember, going into some of my earlier leadership roles, and it's really hard. You like to be, particularly, as a social worker, you go in because you really enjoy people and you like spending time with people. And to be honest, you like being liked by people. And when you, as you would know, when you go into leadership, sometimes there's some decisions that you need to make that are in the best interest of people, but they may not necessarily feel that way. And I'm certainly always driven by making sure that it is in the best interest of people. But what you'll find is that, everyone has their own history, they have their own triggers, they bring so many different things to their workspace. And it took me a while to realise, and I found it very affirming when finally one of my managers said to me, look, you can't have that expectation. Like, stop striving for that, because that's just not realistic and it's not achievable. And it was such a relief to actually think, I'm not failing here. I'm doing my best. I'm sticking to my values. But there are just going to unfortunately be some people that you're not keeping happy, or alternatively, they're not happy on this occasion. It doesn't mean they're always going to be unhappy. Might mean the next, serious leadership decision you need to make, they are happy. So just keeping that balance, I think, is something I've really taken forward. And I know it was just that huge, it was a bit like when I first really understood how budgets worked. I remember something clicking into place as a leader and going, now I get it. Now I understand why those decisions are being made. And it was just one of those sort of light bulb moments of relief, I think, as a leader.
I definitely understand about the budget piece, that's for sure. So, so that's why it's been allocated, and that's what, okay, now I understand. So,
exactly. Yeah.
We're both on the same page. But it's very interesting that you mentioned the word balance. I think balance is measured differently, especially by different people. Just as culture is measured in different ways by different people at different points in their life. And we'll talk about it in more detail later on. But how do you find balance as such? I mean, obviously, the words of advice that you've been given is that obviously you try and not just manage the status quo, but make sure that you service your teams and your business and the purpose and the values in the best possible way of the organisation. But in terms of that balance component, are there any hard and fast rules for you in particular? Was there anything you've implemented specifically that you feel like has aided you to find that balance?
I think probably to have that balance, for me, it's about that balance between being reflective and being proactive. And again, I guess I'm relating all of this as a leader, but sort of personally as well. I think it's really important to remain reflective the whole time, and then there's that critical self-reflection, not in a bad way, but in a way that I'm constantly thinking, was that the best way to manage that? What could I learn from that? Could I do that a bit differently? Being always open to feedback, I think, and trying not to take it personally and being aware of your triggers, I think, is really important. So for me, again, as a younger leader, I realised I was quite sensitive to sort of what I perceived as negative feedback, rather than just appreciating that it's actually helpful feedback. So I am very reflective by nature, and I've had to teach myself to balance that with not taking some of those more proactive feedback personally. And I think I balance that by making sure that I've got really good supports outside of the workplace. Again, as a leader, it can be a bit of a lonely journey at times, and often the higher up you get in your workplace, the more lonely it is, and it needs to be that way in a lot of ways. So it is really important for me, for balance, to have those key important people outside of the workplace that keep me balanced, obviously along with personal hobbies and all of those sorts of things as well. And I guess, look, the other thing as I've gone into more senior roles is probably like trying to find some of that more exec coaching that I think you need throughout your career, no matter how experienced you are, because it can be lonely at the top, as they say. And so remaining balanced and thoughtful and reflective and still happy when sometimes it can get pretty tough. You do need other people around you. You can't do that on your own, I don't think. So people, again, I go to people for my energy, and I guess, that's where I get my balance, if I think about it.
That's a great answer. And I think you do make a good point. So I think there'll be a lot of leaders that will be listening to this conversation, in terms of thinking, as you do climb or clamber or get rewarded, with those sort of leadership positions, the pressure obviously does mount in a multitude of different ways, but it can be quite a lonely place. Who do you turn to? Well, you could just turn to one of your teammates or a peer, if you're in a middle level management role, or operating at a more junior level. It can be a place where it's hard to get new ideas, or it's hard to sort of get a sounding board on certain issues.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess for me, like I said, it can be lonely, but the flip side of that also is that I very much rely on my team and work with the team. So building great teams is also, I guess, I think the most effective way to have balance, because you don't have to do things on your own, but you also, share your skill set, share your ideas. It does generate that creativity, which is sort of part of what I like, and I see that as part of balance. So absolutely, teamwork is is vital, probably the most important thing, I think, to have that balance. So you don't have that sense that you're doing it on your own, and that you're surrounded by, similar and different people. It's really important too.
Yeah. And you mentioned the words building good teams or great teams. I mean, that's an entirely different podcast in itself for sure. But I think you make an unbelievable point. I think it's so true, because when you're hiring in the right frame, whether it's led by values or led by behaviours or led by culture, once that individual obviously hits their strides and they're happy, then that trust is built. There's obviously less of a reliance on you to bring that person to greatness, so long as there's an ongoing support mechanism to guide the individual. But then you can obviously focus on other things that might be more centered around the greater good of the organization moving forward. But I think you make a really, really good point. And like I said, I could probably sit here all day and have a yarn with you around building great teams. On topic that's quite close to my heart, that's for sure.
And you're right, it is a whole nother podcast, because it's most important for an organisation's success, I think.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Now, present you, Gaby. Let's delve a little bit deeper into what's happening in the current life. Now, give us a little bit of an inclination around, I suppose, where your time is best being spent. What problems are you currently solving or currently challenged with that's requiring most of your time?
I guess it's a bit of a combination of things in this particular role. So I mentioned earlier that our whole early years sector is going through huge reforms, which are fantastic. Look, they're very, very well intended, and it's all about supporting families so that children have earlier education and access to free education starting from 3 years old now, so 3 and 4 year old kinder. But the practicalities of doing that across the state are absolutely enormous. There's enormous challenges there. So there's a lot of work sort of in that very sort of high level, big picture ideas about how do we actually do that? And that's anywhere from how do you recruit the staff in a sector that's very tired after COVID, through to ensuring that we actually working with, in our case, our local Shire Council, to have the buildings to be able to accommodate that amount of children that will be cycling through the educational system. So there's huge challenges there. It's a pretty exciting time, and it's a 10-year rollout plan. So that takes up a lot of my time. But there's also a lot of the other thing is an organisation that's had a lot of leadership change in the last sort of 10 years before I came along. And so with that, we're really having to, I guess, in a lot of ways, almost start again and reshape. So working very, very closely with my board, who are absolutely amazing. My chair, he's just actually retired from the chair because they can only do a 2-year term. He says the board's role is to be eyes in, fingers out, which I love, but they do give me a lot of support. So I guess working really closely with them to make sure that we've got the right structure. I'm having to bring in, I guess, a lot of new things that the organisation hasn't had over time. It grew very quickly in the COVID period. It almost sort of doubled. And what happened is our back of house, for COVID and many other reasons, wasn't able to keep up with the challenges of that enormous amount of growth. So I've had to do a whole lot of things, like, for example, bring in our first ever HR manager in an organisation that's 26 years old. So you can imagine the challenges there of no HR for 26 years. And then doing some more fun things, like we've done some rebranding and we've recreated our website. So for families, it's far more accessible. But those things also make a difference. So they can go in now and they can actually see what that space is going to be like for their children. They can get a sense of it. They can see the colours and the love and warmth that goes into creating that space. So I guess my role is great in that the challenges go from quite small and achievable and, picking that low fruit, I guess, through to hugely, mind-boggling challenges that are going to take quite some time to solve. But, the advantage of that is that we are doing that as a sector. Leaders are doing that together. That's certainly not something that I'm doing on my own. So yeah, there's a lot of things to think about, and it's very different to some of the leadership roles that I've had in the past.
It sounds like quite an exciting one. It sounds like your plate's going to be full for the next 10 years.
Yes, it is, absolutely.
Yeah. But one thing you mentioned was around, I suppose, the talent shortages and the difficulty to either identify the right people or the right skill sets. What areas would you say are a level of priority or a level of focus for you to strengthen around the current reform over the next sort of 3 to 5 years?
It's look, that's a huge issue for our sector, and I know that sort of a lot of different sectors have been impacted, particularly after COVID. For us, I think the difference was that we stayed open. So, we had people still having to go every day to work. And, back in the early days of COVID, we didn't really know what it meant. So people had their own children that were at home, that weren't able to go to school, for example, but 3 and 4-year-olds were still going in every day, and our staff were having to face that. And so I guess we're still feeling the impact of that now. So we're trying to, I guess, be creative and do some future planning around being able to really target people's learning needs, and so that's, I guess, a bit more fulfilling and personalised. That's something that we're thinking into the future. We're having to look at I guess for some roles we've had to offer additional leave, those sorts of things to attract and retain people. But as a sector, it's a real challenge. So again, the government's introduced some sort of graduated learning, so people are able to do their degrees in a much shorter time. And whilst it's a great idea, practically it means that people are hitting the ground not very prepared. So we've created some coaching roles in our organisation that we haven't had, again, another role that we haven't had before, which offers a lot more support out on the ground at the kinders rather than, sort of directly via head office. Because there's a high burnout rate, there's a lot of incidents, but just the difference having had people that can just drop what they're doing, go straight out there. If there's some challenge that's come up or an incident that happened or just something that needs to be talked through, there's nothing that beats that, I've found so far. So we're really trying to look at prioritising our resources to give that wraparound approach that not only benefits the children and families, but definitely benefits the staff in our centres. Because it's very, very hard to find teachers and educators these days.
It sure is. And I think they're just generally sort of undervalued. I think that as much as COVID was a basket case for a lot of people, I do feel like there was a newfound respect that was afforded to the educators and teachers, and especially seeing what they were tasked with on a day-to-day basis. And my personal experience, having a 1-year-old and basically a 5-6-year-old that was in prep at that time, and when her first introduction to school life was effectively 3 months into the new year, to a new school, and straight into lockdown and home learning, and seeing how the educators were trying their very, very best to motivate and guide. And obviously, that early education piece is paramount, absolutely paramount, my opinion. And see what they were tasked with. It was difficult and complex and hard to navigate. Yes, and I speak to a number of different people now, and I'm always the first person to say, hey, think about what the educators went through during that time, as much as the parents did.
That's correct. And I think it was very hard, particularly if you had children of school age at home and you were having to go in and still trying to find that very joyful element that I see that our staff bring to the centres. Mm-hmm. Very challenging. So
yeah. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. So it's definitely a topic that's very close to my heart due to personal experience. I'm very interested, and I'm sure our audience are very interested, just around some of the milestones that you're most proud of. And the reason why I find I'm very interested to learn more about this is that you have such a wonderful journey, such a wonderful career in a multitude of different areas, in a multitude of different roles. some more advisory, some more geared towards leadership. Obviously, coming from that sort of that social work background, interest in social work. Are there certain points of your career that you think, you know what, I'm super proud of that, whether it was tough or upon reflection, tougher than you expected?
Yes. Yeah, and it's funny, that experience that you talked about with your child, 5 years old at 3 months in, then suddenly losing that predictability and that, those dreams and hopes. And I imagine that child getting all, revved up and all excited, and then suddenly it all falls apart. And I guess I had a similar experience in my first CEO role, very similar experience in that I went into this role taking over from somebody who'd been in the role for 20 years. So it was a not-for-profit, small, but did a huge amount of things. And this person, she had stamped herself all over and done a great job, and she retired. And fortunately, I knew her and I'd worked with her in the sector, but it was very much sort of her baby. And so that was very, very difficult stepping into the shoes. And I guess I wasn't stepping into her shoes. I was wanting to do it my way, but stepping into a role where people had worked for her and she'd run that organisation for 20 years was very difficult. And then bang, 6 weeks in, new CEO, and we're in lockdown. And so that organisation, it is very hard to survive these days as a small not-for-profit in the sector, and you had to be really, and continue to need to be extremely creative in what you do to bring in money to keep that service going. And so I think one of the things that I'm proudest of was actually being able to take on my first CEO role largely from home in my cupboard. So so 6 weeks in, we all had to be at home in that organisation. Not only was there a staff group, but there was a 400 large volunteer group who were also, extremely disappointed because they weren't able to volunteer in all the different roles. So I guess keeping people on board and invigorated and keeping us going when it was financially very difficult, bringing together people cohesively when they really, they could only get to know me through a screen. And I met people 12 months later and were like, oh my goodness, you actually have legs and you're quite tall. Because I've only ever seen your face on a screen. So I think, I look back on that was going to be hard no matter what I did, because I was taking over such an amazing legacy. But being able to sort of build a team, build people around me, as I said, I really do always rely on the team, and do, really continue to come up with some sort of creative ideas. We had to sort of apply for grant after grant, and we had to keep our donors on board, and look to continue to evolve, even whilst we were in COVID. So, we did family violence groups from home online that we didn't think would work, but they did. We did educational packages that we developed for young people that were struggling in schools. We did a whole lot of, business as usual, but also new business during that time. So I think that was probably, and of course there was cultural elements that you're really conscious of. So we created a really supportive program for our staff during COVID as well that I think, really kept us going. We had staff that were working very closely with the child protection system and still needing to go out, and then coming back and having their own children at home and, literally having to work from their cupboards. So a lot of social work in the past, you go out, whereas this was coming into people's homes and quite challenging. So I think, looking back on that time, that was a real milestone for me because it was my first CEO role, and it was probably, throw yourself right in the deep end and then anything from there will be okay. So I guess that was one of them. There's been quite a few, and I look at some of my milestones as they're both around leadership, but also around some of that creativity in social work. They're key for me, key milestones as well. That's what I like, doing a little bit of the different and giving people some opportunities to do things a little bit differently and to target exactly where we might see gaps in our work and do things creatively to fill those gaps. So I guess some of the other milestones that I think about are back in my Anglicare days, for example, I used to oversee family violence and drug and alcohol, and they were two very separate programs. But what we did was we created a program specifically we used to run men's behaviour change programs, which is men who have perpetrated violence, and we combined that for men specifically who had drug and alcohol problems themselves and had been violent, which made a lot of sense. And we created a group specifically from them, and bringing those two doesn't sound that difficult, but actually have very philosophical frameworks that they work from. So bringing those two together and working through that was absolutely an amazing experience for all of us. And we all learnt and challenged ourselves on some of our beliefs and philosophies and frameworks. And I think that then the delivery of that program, again, I didn't deliver it. I worked with the leaders of those areas to deliver it. But I think like things like that, they're the things when I eventually retire, I'll look back on and think, yeah, that was pretty good. So really, I think that for me, it's always about the families and children. And I think of the children of those men, the difference that would make in their lives and potentially future generations. You can't beat that. That for me is really important. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful example of, what is legacy, effectively. Reflection, when you look back at certain programs of work that you've implemented, not was it rewarded at the time, but what's the lasting impact of those programs? And I'm sure you'll look back in the future and be like, you know what, they're still working, they're still good. How many families been impacted by those programs, been supported by those programs, and you would have had a pivotal role to play, I'm sure.
I hope so. And I think some of that, even if people aren't participating anymore, the intergenerational, family violence, for example, if we can make a difference with those men, then they no longer perpetrate violence or violence in front of their children, then those children will grow up, I think, to be, happier, functioning members of our society with their own happier children. So hopefully we hope that that's what, and look, measuring outcomes is a really important part of the work as well. And I think combining both those programs gives you a much bigger opportunity to get to achieve better outcomes. I hope.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely spot on. This kind of feeds into the final question I've got about the present you, is around who you look up to or who you look to for support or inspiration, because obviously the programs of work can be quite testing, can be quite emotional. And even you mentioned as well, sometimes it's an insight into people's lives and you can bring the work home. How do you, I suppose, support that lifestyle, and who do you look up to for support? And again, as for lack of better words, to be inspired by?
So I guess there's, for me, there's the personal element to that, and there's the professional element to that. And for the personal element, of course, there's friends, but I think, the people I look up to most are my two children and my husband. And they do absolutely inspire me every day. So my two children who are adults, my kids, the adults, they've just been away together on a trip overseas for 6 weeks actually, and come back. And having had them away together, I realise how much I do look up to them, and and they are incredibly emotionally intelligent young people, and they're very different. So one's done a master's in international relations, and the other one's a head beer brewer. So such different people, but very, very wise and reflective. And I have enormous respect for them, and vice versa. So they inspire me every day. And of course, my beautiful husband, in a very different way, he's again somebody with huge emotional intelligence. He's had his own journey with cancer that he's fought and beat with absolute just amazing strength. So I'm very lucky in that I have a fantastic family who inspire me each and every day. And I guess on a professional level, look, there's been lots of people, and I've been very lucky. At Doncare, for example, I worked very closely with Rosie Batty, who, I don't know if everyone, excuse me, probably aware of Rosie, but Rosie, unfortunately, her son was murdered by her ex-partner who had mental health issues. And I did a lot of work with Rosie. She was our ambassador, and she was and is enormously giving and generous of her time, and passionate and strong, and just an honest person. So spending time with her was for me really inspirational, and it sort of was always sort of brought me back to earth, and made everything, you know, be okay again when I'd have chats with Rosie. She loves a chat. So I think Rosie Batty has been very inspiring, and I think alternatively a male is Peter Rusler, who was the CEO of Each for probably 30 years. I think it was last year that he might have retired. And Each has become an enormous health and welfare, I guess, service. And he is a man who, again, has enormous emotional intelligence, but just so generous with his time. He built that organisation from tiny to huge, and his feet just remained very solidly on the ground. He would reach out and offer help all the time in a very I don't know, he's just humble, very humble, and clever, inspiring man. So I've been really lucky. I've had some great leaders over the time. And I guess both those people weren't my direct managers, but they were people that I did find absolutely inspiring. And I've had, a variety of different managers myself who've been very inspiring as well. But I think they're sort of the people that stand out the most for me.
Wonderful. How important do you feel it is to seek support, let's say at home, and maybe support outside the home place?
Absolutely vital, I think. Absolutely vital. And look, whether you're in social work or anything else, and look, particularly in leadership. And look, I've spent the majority of my career in management and leadership roles, so I'm only coming from that perspective. But it's absolutely vital because, like I said, it can be lonely. It can be hugely emotionally draining if you're someone that invests, every being, which I do. It does take its toll. And you mentioned just briefly culture before. I've gone into organisations where, for various reasons, there's been, quite significant cultural challenges, and that's certainly the case. I think post-COVID, lots of different workplaces are experiencing that, and so managing culture as a leader, and that, I guess, taking on that sense of responsibility, and also that a lot of staff members will see their leaders as being responsible for culture. I don't see it that way. I see it's everyone's responsibility to build and grow and develop a positive culture, but certainly you need people to lead culture, you need cultural champions. And you can't be a cultural champion and a strengths-focused leader if you don't have that backing yourself, I think. So I mentioned I was very lucky to have a very supportive family. With or without that, you also, I think you do need to have hobbies and interests and good friends that do prop you up and are also part of your identity outside of the workplace. If you are just, your job, I think then that can take an incredible toll over time, no matter how dedicated you are. So external support is, for me, absolutely vital.
With the word inspiration as well, I think it's a word that does get bounded around a lot. And I know that there's been sort of darker times in my life thinking, where do I find the answer? Who can I turn to? And whether it's friends, family, peer supports, I've been very fortunate to be able to lean on people when I've needed them most. If someone is looking to be inspired, who's maybe going through a challenging time, and do you have any ideas as to how someone can potentially seek some inspiration if things were a little bit darker in their current form?
I think in terms of inspiration, I think, like I said, and like you said at the very beginning, it's about having that balance. Mm-hmm. For me. So if you're not finding inspiration within the workplace, if you're not finding it within your colleagues. I certainly know podcasts, for example, funnily enough, incredibly inspiring. Listening to people, getting some ideas. There might just be one, you might listen to a half hour, an hour podcast, but there's that one thing that you take away with you that I think, can be inspiring. I talk about my husband's girlfriend, who's not his girlfriend. It's Lisa Leong, who does a leadership podcast on the ABC. I definitely, we both find inspiration in those sorts of podcasts, and they just sort of help you, I think, reflecting and maybe, bring to the surface some of those ideas that you haven't thought of. But I guess for me, again, inspirations from your loved ones and from your friends. And I know I'll go to different friends, and you're probably the same, and different friends for different ideas. But sometimes I think if you reverse it, you get that, I hadn't thought of that either. Like some people will, I think it's good sometimes to not do the obvious as well. And that's where you get that sort of left of centre idea that actually, may be that last piece of the puzzle that you haven't thought of. So that variety, being the spice of life, I think that can be quite inspiring as well. My husband and I were just talking about a friend this morning who sees the world so differently. He believes in thylacines, for example, but we were saying we just love it because it makes us, I don't necessarily believe in thylacines, but I do love the fact that he is passionate and he's creative and he thinks about all of those things so differently to the way I do that it makes me challenge myself. So I think sometimes difference can be inspiring, but also so sometimes someone just saying you're on the right track, you're doing an awesome job, that can be really inspiring as well and keep me on track when I might be doubting myself. Again, it's that, for me, like I was saying right at the beginning, it's that balance of support and challenge and reflection. So being open to hearing what people say to you and what they may pick up that you haven't may just be that one little bit of inspiration that you hadn't thought of. And I love those moments, don't you, when you just go, oh, that's it. That's the missing piece.
I finally found it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and you may not have got there yourself. Yeah, and I mean, look, I find that through I'll be talking and thinking at the same time, and then that's sort of also how I find my inspiration, like talking with people. And like I said, I get my energy from people. But if you don't, like I said, podcasts or other sort of more quieter activities can still be really inspiring, I think.
That's such a great answer, and I have to totally agree. The people that you surround yourself with who have a different perspective or a different view or a different opinion on certain matters sometimes can be the most inspiring thing. Just to listen and understand what their viewpoint is. Also, the one thing I suppose helped me when things got a little bit tough was to kind of surround myself with individuals who were quite positive. Not overly enthusiastic, at the drop of a hat, but people that could shine a different light, provide a different lens, and help me sort of climb out of whatever challenge I was faced at that time. So I do think the crowds that you surround yourself with do have a massive impact on your well-being, and also as well just on your general outlook at that particular moment in time. And you preface that in your answer there, so I think that's paramount.
Absolutely, like that positivity, I think, makes a huge difference. And I think, again, sometimes probably like with that reflection, knowing, like for me, for example, having to pace myself. And so sort of surrounding myself with people that aren't necessarily the same as me. So remembering that some people do need more time, more self-care. They're not going to latch onto that as quickly and be as excited as I am as soon as I am. So those things that keep you balanced and remind you that you need to think about how other people will do things, not just how you'll see things. I find actually quite inspiring as well, like that wanting to learn, and deliberately I do appreciate the people that go, now hang on, slow down. Someone may not necessarily, okay, yes, you're right. Being told no sometimes can be quite inspiring.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Sometimes you need to hear it, right? It's like
seconds,
yeah. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it may not feel inspiring at the time, but moments later you'll probably start feeling, yeah, okay, yeah, you're right.
I think that's an excellent point. And you mentioned reflection as well. I mean, I think even though if we were to compare the recruitment industry to, let's say, the community care or social care worker industry, I think the common denominator is it's fast-paced and things change within the hour, within the day, within the week. And I do find that I'm guilty with this, that you can run as fast as you can, to get through that task. And then you get to the end of the week, it's like, have I achieved what I wanted to achieve? And sometimes that's no. I feel like I've worked, it could be 60, 70 hours this week, but have I actually, ticked off or achieved that goal? And sometimes taking that time to reflect on what's happened so you can improve the next week or learn from that mistake. I do find that sometimes I'm a bit of a victim of that, of going super fast and being like, oh God, have I learned one of the previous week, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a couple of parallels to be addressed there.
I think so. And I think that list thing is interesting in itself, that you can get really, I think, overwhelmed if you haven't ticked off things on your list. And I remember somebody saying to me once, I was talking about, all the issues that were coming up in a role in HR, and, all I'd been doing was talking to people all week and not having done what I needed to get done. And she said to me, she was a social worker too, and so was her husband, and she said, my husband said to me, and he's right, in senior roles in particular, that is your job. Like, that is, you are actually ticking the most important things off your list, in that you have taken time and listened and problem solved for that person. And you may not have got your, that bit of the grant written that you needed to get done or what have you, as quickly as you wanted to. But the most important part of the job is the people. And that was for me, I try to remember that whenever I start getting obsessed with how many tasks I've got to get through, I always think, but now, how many people have I spoken to, reassured, helped contain when they've asked for it, supported, those sorts of things, that for me, remembering that that's got to be number one on the list. And it sort of puts that list back in perspective again at times. Because that is the most important time. Doesn't mean you don't do it. Obviously we need to get all those other things done, but I know there's been times earlier on when I'd forget that is, that if people are okay in the organisation, then everything else will happen more quickly at a pace that I'm going to be more comfortable with, because they've had that support. Yeah.
How important do you feel that people first approach is to leadership? Do you think it's the fundamental? Do you think it's up there in your top three as such? How paramount is that to look after your immediate peers and teams?
Absolute priority. And it's been, for me, in the last few roles, and I think this sort of happens again as you go through that hierarchy, that it's a double-edged sword, that question as well, because obviously being supportive, proactive, strength-focused, available, all of those things are vital elements of being a good leader, I think. And like I said, working with teams and developing a team is enormously important. There's the flip side that I think people struggle with, which is where sometimes you'll have cultures or people where they've not been held to account, for example, or leaders or earlier leaders have never been taught how to have some of those hard-to-have conversations that aren't necessarily nice or pleasant. And the person on the receiving end or participating in that may not see that at the time as a positive thing, but that's an important part of supporting your people and your staff as well, that responsibility that you have for development. And obviously you always come from a strengths perspective, but that flip side of there can be some really toxic cultures that you'll go into, and there can be cultures where there hasn't been the professional expectations and ethics applied as much as they could be, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, you're always supporting people, but the way that people view support needs to be seen across a spectrum from my perspective. So it doesn't mean you're not supportive when you're having a hard-to-have conversation. But if you can have that hard-to-have conversation and still keep somebody engaged and reinvigorated at the end of that process. That's supporting people as well. So I guess that was one of my early learnings that I'm really mindful now when I work with people that are sort of younger or newer leaders. That is really good support. You are being a really good leader if you're able to do that, as well as it's easy to say to someone, awesome job, fantastic, makes you feel good. And that's really important. But so is that very careful, thoughtful, but that critical reflective feedback that can be strengths focused, but it's still a learning opportunity, I think. So developing people, again, that's a whole other podcast, isn't it? But the people, absolutely the most important, and like I said at the very beginning, that's what drew me into social work in particular, and then that's why I guess I went into leadership rather than down the more direct sort of clinical practice line, because I wanted to work with, and I thought I'd be more effective working with people that then worked with people. But yes, people, absolutely the most important thing, I think, that brings success to an organisation and to somebody's personal success. But it needs to be balanced, in my view.
So does that mean that our next podcast show is going to be called Leadership with Empathy, Purpose and Accountability?
Oh, perfect. Nailed it.
All right.
You get inspiration through talking.
That's it. I'll tie you in for another couple of hours. Don't worry.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. That's great.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Gary. Honestly, I have to admit, in terms of the insights that you were sharing, I felt like I'm learning a huge amount, not just about yourself as an individual, but as an inspiring thought leader and a people leader. So I appreciate what you're sharing, genuinely.
Thank you. Can I just share one personal thing? Because I'm in a cult that I'd like other people to join, and that is the indoor rock climbing cult.
Tell us more, please.
Mindfulness and, debriefing and having something that inspires you, that where you think you're not thinking, but you come down from that wall and suddenly you've solved the world's problems, but you haven't thought of them at all at the same time. So in terms of my leisure activity and what's most important in my life, outside of family and friends, that's very much up there. And so anyone that wants to join the cult, we're always looking for extras. I'm always happy to be contacted if anyone wants to learn how to become a rock climber.
Yeah, good. I might know a few people actually in the office.
Awesome.
I'll have a conversation with them.
We're an obsessed group.
Proactive, looking for members, right? Done. Leave that with me.
But it is like, there's been times when I've been incredibly stressed at work, and I go, and all of a sudden, it's a really good way of, no, that's work. I need to stop thinking about that now and focus on me, the individual, me, the family member, me, the mum, me, the whatever.
Yeah.
And just have that. I'm way too busy to do the normal, the mainstream mindfulness. So that's my version of it. But for the people that just can't sit still.
Nothing wrong with that. So I've recently, in the past year, found my love for spin classes. So a few of us pretty much go and smash that out over a lunch hour, which is a really good
What
way
was it?
to press spin. So cycling.
Spin classes.
Yeah, which is strange. And my sort of mindfulness and meditation before work is CrossFit. So I've been doing that for 5 years, and that's a good way to set the precedent for a positive day.
So you know all about cult too, because my son's in the CrossFit cult.
Really? All right. So am I. So there you go.
Yes. People get very addicted to that as well, don't they?
They sure do. They sure do.
Yeah.
Listen, thank you so much for giving us, and listen, just obviously tying things up at the moment, especially if we're looking at, future self or people that do want to break into that leadership arena. What advice, what can you provide, that someone is really looking to follow footsteps to C-suite or go down that leadership route?
I think for me, it's, and we've talked about it before, I guess it's about bringing your most authentic self to the role.
Yeah.
And again, this is sort of something I think I learnt fairly on. You don't want to be employed. You want to be employed for who you are and what you bring, and continuing to believe in yourself as well. So you don't want to be breaking, going in interviews and preparing. And yes, it's great to look at all the theory and the frameworks and all of that sort of stuff. That's really important. But I guess ultimately you want to be employed for the leader that you are, and to have that belief in yourself and all of those things that we've talked about, like building a support system around you. So when you start to stray from that, because there are times when things get pretty tough, that people pull you back and remind you of the good things that you bring as a leader. But I think from breaking in, it's not really advice on how to break in. It's more about when you're there, really remaining true to yourself. Sometimes I've not done that, and that's when I think, start to unravel. And then, I'm lucky that someone will give me a kick up the butt and set me back on track. But good leaders, I think they bring the best elements of themselves whilst also knowing when you need to, I guess, that self-care and look after yourself. So you need to balance that with not bringing everything of yourself to the role, so you don't tip over the edge. But that having that self-respect, I guess, and belief in yourself, but being open to ideas, obviously, is probably for me the most important thing.
How important do you feel like that self-respect is to be an effective leader? If you're going to exude those values or those behaviours and bring your best self and your authentic self, how important is that component?
Oh, it's absolutely vital. And I think the times when I haven't, your energy really seems to, it slows right down. You start to lose inspiration. That, I think, and again, one of the most important learnings for me, that self-care that we talked about, I am very high pace and didn't take time out sort of in the past. And that's when you start doubting yourself. And when that self-doubt starts trickling in, I think that's when you can start making bad decisions or just losing sight of the bigger picture or, that vision that you have. So that self-belief and I guess having people around you that care, that remind you when they can see that slipping a little bit, is really, really important. Absolutely. Yeah. I think probably almost the most vital part of the role. And as long as you're open to feedback at the same time, that balance of reflection and, that feedback, but also that belief that, you're there for a reason. People chose you for a reason, or in your case, people joined your organisation for a reason. You are a part of that reason, and you should be proud of that. That's not... you can be humble and proud at the same time, but the things that we as individual people bring, I think, are the things that, people leave or stay, and the people that stay are the people that should be there, and the people that leave, they need that inspiration from somebody else, and that's fine too. Like I said, you can't keep everyone happy all of the time, but that self-belief and, going forward, thinking, I guess, keeping your eye on that in a balanced sort of way with feedback from others, that's the magic combination, I hope.
Yeah, the magic formula, right?
Yeah. And like I said, when there's been times that things have been ultra challenging and I lose sight of that, that's actually where I do worse. When I'm, when I'm back on track, and thinking about, okay, what, I'll often think what was I thinking when I first went into this role? When you're filled with that passion, what was I doing that's different to what I'm doing now? And sometimes that sort of helps me reinvigorate and remind myself of, that's right, that's why you were chosen, and that's what you're wanting to do. So I do that at times when I am struggling, because we all have times where we're going to doubt ourselves and feel down about ourselves, and then there'll be other times when we very much should give ourselves a pat on the back. And Australia's got that tall poppy syndrome. Don't buy into that. Feel good about yourself. When you've done something well, celebrate it and do it again.
I couldn't agree more. Just sometimes just reward yourself. If you're not getting that tap on the back, we feel like you've done a good job. That's it. Just reward yourself, whatever that looks like. It could be doing some rock climbing potentially. Be like, right, that's it. Yeah. I'm happy this week. Draw a line for it. Let's lead into the weekend with a smile on our face. Oh, wonderful. Gaby, thank you again. Listen, we typically end this podcast as we're coming to the closing moments at the moment. just around sort of things that are quite personal to you. And I thought I'd just throw it out there. You mentioned the rock climbing piece that you obviously adore. Are there any other interests that you enjoy or other activities that keep you balanced and keep you pep and smiling throughout the week?
Oh, look, like I said, definitely, look, I am obsessed with podcasts. So I love the fact that I'm on one at the moment.
Right.
I just think the magic of podcasts, I get inspiration and laughs and joy. And so in COVID was just fantastic because I could listen to even more podcasts. One of the things I've surprised myself, I love gardening. When I was younger, my dad used to make us weed the garden and I hated it, but we bought a blank block in Healesville that is now absolutely, flourishing with the garden because you can chuck anything in the ground out here and it grows. So it's very rewarding. I'm impatient. I like instant gratification and you can almost get that gardening out here. So gardening, reading, friends, definitely playing cards and drinking red wine on a Friday night with my husband is it's my most favourite activity, especially when I win.
I love it. What's your favourite type of red?
It varies.
Yeah.
Probably a Shiraz at the moment.
Yes, good. I was drinking a nice Malbec last night. So, yes, we all have our vices.
We do. And they're important too for relaxation.
Yeah, it's true.
Maybe not so good for rock climbing the next day.
Yeah, no one likes a red wine hangover, do they? That's for sure. Gaby, again, thank you for your contribution, your wisdom, the insights, especially around yourself and your own personal journey. There is so much to take from this. I cannot wait to see what happens in the near future with yourself and your teams, and obviously your progression with rock climbing as well. So I'm very, very keen to see it. So thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much for asking me. It's been so much fun.
It has. It's been awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
We would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we operate today, the peoples of the Kulin Nation. We also pay our respects to their elders, past and present. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land.